Ambrogio Caiani. Welcome to PhD Lounge. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank you for being here present here at the talk. And before going to deep down what you would like to share with us, I like to share that when I received an email from someone who's a PR, and he was detailing the description of, we have an academic lecturer who would love to share his latest book called Flirting with Evil. And it was explaining, the email was explaining the whole description of the book. And for me, and I was like, oh my gosh, never expected this from a PR. And this is quite rare on my side, because obviously when I started PhD Lounge, I would go and invite them by my own. Now I have more people coming into the podcast, sending me emails rather than sending to them, and so it's like a bit of both. And so I've replied to them. It would be a great honor to have another lecturer around here to share his latest research, what it is about, and so I'm really glad. So welcome, Ambrogio.
But it's clearly a testament to your success that we are seeking invitations rather than waiting for them. So I think that clearly makes a lot of sense, Luis. But thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, thank you. And just before we going down with Flirting with Evil, tell me about your PhD journey, very briefly. Why deciding to study modern European history, and then what happened next?
So, I mean, I guess it's like anything, a vocation, and like I'm sure many historians, it started with my grandfather telling me stories of the past. I grew up in Ireland, which was in the 1980s, which had a lot of and all that. So I became very, very interested in what divided humanity, revolutions and conflicts. And then I had some very, very good lecturers who guided me and eventually encouraged me to do further research on the French Revolution, and in particular the failing constitutional monarchy. And I was never particularly good at anything else but history. This seemed to be my main vocation. And since then, I've gotten an academic job and I've continued to publish. Most of my work is in the French Revolution and Napoleon, and the history of 18th to 19th century religion. So recently is a bit of a challenge for me. I've been going into more recent history during which I was alive, which is even more shocking.
Wow. How was it shocking?
Well, in the sense that, up till now, if I wanted to interview anybody historically or do to draw a pentagram on the ground and say, I summon thee, because that would have been impossible. But I'm now within living memory, and shocking in the sense that it's more challenging when you have memories of something, trying to be objective, trying to sort of dissociate your memories and your partisan outlook to, let's say, when you're examining the Jacobins or the Girondins in the 1790s, you feel you can sort of take a step back and sort of not have skin in the game. I don't know about you in the Persian Empire or whatever, if you feel particularly partisan, but you sort of go, this feels a little bit more distant. Whereas looking at recent politics or the church's behavior in the 1990s or early 2000s, I sort of go, I'm not entirely sure I'm quite as distant as I would be from the 1790s.
Yes. So from that whole experience, and then having this opportunity to become an academic lecturer, then you decided I'd like to expand this concept and explore it by doing my own research, deep research on the negative aspects. I would say negative aspects, so to speak, in the Catholic Church, right?
Yeah, I think that it's not so much that I'm hunting for negative aspects.
Yeah.
It is not a good century for humanity. And that unfortunately, I am a liberal Catholic, that the church wasn't a beacon of light in a dark century, but I guess it shared in that darkness. And that's what I discovered. But one of the key reasons for doing the book was that in March 2020, then opened the papers of Pius XII for the first time. So we have, for the first time in our history, the ability to look at the church's perspective until 1958. And this is unprecedented. And we've been able, through monographs and through archival files, to know a lot more about what was going on in the Vatican. It's a negative story. But in some ways, that does have hope. You know, the Second Vatican Council, there are wonderful saints in all of this. So there is still light in the darkness, if I can put it like that.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It goes both ways. Whether there's light, there's also darkness, and vice versa. And the Catholic Church itself, being the most representative religion across the world, is neither bad nor good. It's not perfect in all sense. And from you writing this book, Flirting with Evil, was this the title that you came up with it, or were there any other title ideas you were thinking about?
To be entirely honest with you, my publisher commissioned me to do a critical history of the Catholic Church in the 20th century. That was the original title, not very marketable. And my partner, to sell stuff, said, why don't we think about something a little bit more eye-catching? Yes. And they came up with Flirting with Evil, which I think is intriguing. But also, I think flirting also implies that it's not consummated, that it's not possessed by evil. It's tentatively negotiating with evil
rather than just
being taken in by evil, rather than being possessed by it.
Sure. So it was more of a not sort of a cat and mouse game, but sort of playing with the dices and see where this goes.
Yeah, exactly. I guess the Catholic Church hoped that they could best the devil, that they could a very difficult game of chess. And in some cases they succeeded, and in others less so.
Sure. And as we all try to study the Catholic Church, now you've made an extensive research from the late 19th century and then throughout the 20th century, and now and currently with the last three popes of the 21st century. But let's take for the first chapter then, where over 100 years of French Revolution has passed, and then we have the Catholic Church, the Vatican, losing their sovereignty in Italy with the King Emmanuel VIII, I think, and then the separation laws in France and Portugal, republic implementations, scientific research over biblical studies, and many other geopolitical tensions that were happening in Europe that preceded the First World War. One of which we know it as well, with the murder of Francisco Fernando by Gavrilo Princip. I would like to know that Pius X becomes the Pope and then gets through these complex decades that preceded World War I. What were his turning points to begin bringing back Catholic influence?
Well, in some ways, he was a really unusual man insofar as, unlike most previous popes, he wasn't a canon lawyer. If you look at medieval history, they all have one qualification in common. They are lawyers.
Yes.
And up till the present day, if you want to become a pope, having a law degree is a pretty good qualification. Also, most unusually for a pope, until, I guess, Pope Francis, he's been a parish priest. He's had parishioners. He's talked to ordinary people. For him, he should have never become pope, because when the cardinals were in conclave in 1903, they were voting, and they were about to elect somebody called Cardinal Rampolla, until a Polish cardinal, Puznia, said, wait a minute, I have a letter from the Emperor Franz Joseph saying I am vetoing Rampolla. Everybody was angry or whatever. Pius X, Sarti as he was a good compromise candidate. Little did they know, and this is a dubious honor or a dubious title, that they were going to elect the most reactionary pope probably in the 20th century. Sarti, unlike Rampolla, who was fluent in several, only Italian and Latin, he disliked intellectuals. He came from a peasant mindset that didn't like change or reverberations, and also a certain sense that modernity was not something you made compromises with, but you resisted. Because after all, the world had lost its Italian kingdom wasn't peaceful. Victor Emmanuel II knocked on the Pope's doors with cannons. So therefore, it was a traumatic process. So what does Pius X do? Well, he maintains a lot of the legacy of previous popes. Compromise with the Italian state, which has usurped the patrimony of St. Peter. Therefore, good Catholics should not vote in elections or stand as candidates in Italy. Furthermore, when the French and the Portuguese have laws on the separation of church and state, again, the end of diplomatic representation with these countries. By the end of tangible signs is that, the church in the medieval period had been the greatest diplomatic listening post in the world. It only has 9 nunciatures or embassies in 1914.
Yes.
And bizarrely, it's concluding a concordat with Serbia in 1914. As you say, the nation that gave rise to Gavrilo Princip, thus antagonizing the Habsburgs, its friends. But the key thing Pius X forges is with modernism.
Sure.
And by the way, that's not the novels of modernist writers like Virginia Woolf or whatever. Modernism is, in theological terms, a vision that the truth is not eternal, but rather that the Bible, the Gospels have been reinterpreted, that the meaning of the texts has been denatured by tradition, interpolation, and various other things. That the scientific study of these texts gives us a very different vision to church tradition. You can understand why he didn't like this one bit. So the Pope condemns in Pascendi Gregis Dominus all modernism. That all clergy to take an anti-modernist oath. Until 1964, as a Catholic clergyman, you had to swear not to be modern, to reject anything called modernist.
Sure.
And he also created a secret society with the help of somebody called Umberto Benigni, called the Solidatium Pianus, or the Sodality of Pius V, which actually spied on clergy and get rid of them. And they had a spy network sending information through Belgium, into France, and into Germany. And during the First World War, the archives of this secret society were actually captured in the Belgian town of Louvain by William II's German imperial troops. So we know a lot about them because they ended up in German archives.
Yeah. Which is quite interesting because having spies is quite a modernist thing. And that they developed their own kind of a modernist secret services and having their own technology to develop. So it's quite ironic to say their view of modernism in a theological sense, but at the same time adopting a bit of those modernist views. And it was also interesting for them saying that they're against modernism, scientific research, which it quite brings back the most atrocious acts they did during Inquisition, and so it seems quite of a controverted decades of Pius X in trying to combat against that modernism, but at the same time absorbing those bits at the papacy favor. So
there's a huge irony in all of this.
Yes.
Although don't be too impressed, because the spies are very good, But, they use ciphers and cryptology, like most diplomatic services. But the joke ran that the Italian military intelligence got information about what the Curia was doing before the Pope, because they broke the codes almost immediately. But as the Vatican condemns historicism, biblical scholarship, philology, but they don't condemn Darwin. They don't take a big interest in genetics, which is actually created by Mendel, an Austrian monk. So weirdly, they don't have that much of a problem with some modern science, but they don't like the humanities. They don't like anything that unsettles. And with evolution,
Sure.
there isn't a major part of the Bible that doesn't say that it's possible.
And so I think just they're trying to carry on with it, using their own power just to influence the people and those brilliant minds of the early 20th century in trying to conduct research thoroughly by questioning basically biblical studies from a modernist point of view.
Oh, completely. And I couldn't agree with you more. Anything that attacks the power of the church is terrible.
Yeah.
There's a French biblical scholar called Alfred de Loisy, who says in a famous little red book, as he called it, that Jesus called for the kingdom, and the church really did not like this. He was excommunicated God knows how many times
Wow.
just for saying that.
Wow, I can imagine how many excommunications they've done it over these early decades of the 20th century. But I'd like to know more about now the First World War, where Italy is involved, Mussolini included, and he'll take over the country in the aftermath. At the same time, we have the Ottoman Empire collapsing. They just decided to throw a tantrum towards the Armenians, up to do an ethnic cleansing, right?
Yeah.
And then it's dismantled. The British and the French take over the Middle East, forming colonies. Then the Russian Revolution comes in, and then Benedict the 15th, and then Pius XI in power, and they claim to be neutral. Could you share with us, in their theological sense, what this neutrality meant for them, and how did this happen that eventually led the Vatican and the Catholic Church in general to join forces with Mussolini? Were there any flirting missions they tried to use to restore Christian faith in the world?
There is a lot of flirtation after the First World War, not much beforehand.
Sure.
The church had been moving towards neutrality since the 18th century, in the sense that there was a growing theological realization that Christ was the Prince of Peace, and that the Pope, like the Renaissance, actually leading armies into battle, didn't really look very peaceable. So, especially when it came to wars of dynastic succession or whatever, the church tried to keep out of them. Now, this is not the same when it comes to local churches, because if you look at the different sides in the First World War, local clergy and bishops are not just blessing souls and ammunition and saying that God is on our side.
Yes.
Which for the Vatican is not helpful. But when it comes to the Entente, the Vatican has no diplomatic representation. England is a Protestant country, and legates have no permanent ambassador. Relations are better, but they're not brilliant. Since the separation of church and state in France in 1905, no ambassador. And Italy's existence means that the church has lost its kingdom, so no representation. One of the clauses of the Treaty of London of 1915, when Italy changes side, that no allied or Entente power will negotiate with with the Vatican. On the other side, the Central Powers, Austria, is the Catholic power par excellence. So there is an apostolic nuncio in Vienna. There is also an apostolic nuncio, a very controversial one in Munich, who through Munich negotiates with Berlin. And there is a minister plenipotentiary in Istanbul who actually protests against the Armenian massacre. And in Russia, there's no representation because Tsarism was seen as persecuting the church.
Yes.
The church is technically neutral, but it doesn't want the Habsburg monarchy to collapse because Catholicism is the monarchy there. And also, ironically, it's worried about the Ottoman Empire collapsing because it's afraid that Russian Orthodox Tsarist rule will remove Catholicism from the Holy Land and other things. So actually, Vatican intelligence actually tells the Bulgarians and the Ottomans from Romania. So it's neutral, but maybe favoring the Central Powers more. The defeat of Germany and Austria-Hungary is a major shock. Because no matter how you count it, 9 new countries more or less emerge after the First World War.
Yes.
And they're all liberal democracies, more or less, or parliamentary democracies. But the church doesn't love parties because they're horizontal, not vertical. And therefore, they negotiate, they make compromises. They don't believe that the truth is one and indivisible.
Sure.
Whereas the church likes dictators more. I mean, talking about flirting, in 1919, they actually think in 1970, should be a good thing because the Bolshevik antipathy towards the Tsar and orthodoxy, the church says, oh, this might be a way we can do a Soviet Concordat and we can come to peace with the Bolsheviks, and then Catholicism might spring forward as the new or better religion of the Soviet Union. Clearly, nobody in the Curia of the Vatican over the past years and hadn't quite understood that it wasn't that Lenin was against Russian Orthodoxy, he was against all religion, that this is an atheist state, and they do mean it. And it takes until the early 1930s and a major scandal in Berlin, which is quite a fun story, for the church to finally abandon the Bolsheviks and the communists of Russia as potential breeding. Where I think they're more successful, they're more interested is with nationalistic authoritarian movements. Whether this be in Ireland, whether this be in Italy, whether it be in Spain or Portugal, that ultimately they feel that they can do business with strongmen, with authority figures. Pius XI meets Mussolini in 1920 and somewhat prophetically says, Mussolini is a formidable guy. He is the future.
Yes.
Little did they know that he would be right. So yeah, there's a lot of flirting after the First World War because the old pillars of support for the church are gone, and they need new friends.
And so for that, they needed to find influential individuals who would hold the power, influence the nation, each nation. So in this case, Mussolini taking over control of monarchic Italy under the monarchy, and then changing its shift to what is known as the fascism era, and then the church having some sort of that concordat in order to maintain its power and their neutrality as a state within the country.
Yeah, I mean, Mussolini is a really interesting guy because, awful as he is, he's got political acumen. 1919, the Fasci di Combattimento, if you look at the first manifesto, it says, we are going to confiscate all church land and limit the freedom of bishops.
For the good of the state.
For the good of the state.
Yes.
And that year they get 3,000 votes. It's a disaster.
How is that?
Says, and also they're Republican, anti-monarchical. So after 1919, they completely changed their position. They become pro-church, they become pro-monarchy, and they very slowly cannibalize the rest of the Italian political establishment. Crucifixes are back up in schools. Mussolini has to force his wife to marry him in church. They baptize their children
Yes.
and crying that she doesn't want to be baptized. She's very, very anti-religious. But he sort of says, "You're my wife, and this will look good for public opinion." And during the night, between the Vatican and Palazzo Venezia, where Mussolini has his offices, a rather shady Jesuit called Tacchi Venturi is going back and forth between doing these delicate negotiations, which, as you said, will culminate in 1929 as the Lateran Accords. But the first of many such concordats. There will be one with Spain. There will be one with Portugal. It's a great age of concordats. And this is basically a peace treaty. And the Vatican. And the major deal for the church is it gets 1.7 billion lira in compensation for the loss of territory.
Right. So, because there was loads of concordats during the 20s, that led to what was known as the Golden Twenties, which we know, or we can have some brief knowledge that it was quite sugar-coated, because we had the economy was booming following the war, but at the same time, throughout the decade, we have the crash of 1929, and then we had anti-clerical activism in Mexico, which was interesting. That it became known as the Cristeros. It was so interesting to know about it. And then the rise of conservative Catholicism that gave inspiration, not saying inspiration, that angered leftist protests in Spain, France, that eventually then led to the first military dictatorships in South America, in Europe, such as the 1926 military dictatorship in Portugal, that was the antecedent of the Portuguese fascism starting in 1933, and then other more frosty relationships with the Vatican, between the Vatican and Church of England, and then corporativism starts to boom from 1929 onwards. I do wonder how then Italian fascism, collaborating with the Vatican, led to that, and then the extreme nationalist parties in Europe in the 1930s.
That's a really interesting question, and I guess that one has to be very nuanced in one's understanding of this.
Lots of nuance, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, all fascists are alike is not to say that any fascists are necessarily good.
Sure.
But the relationship between Mussolini's Italy and the Vatican was generally cozy, apart from a major crisis in 1932 over Mussolini trying to limit Catholic associations, civil society ones, like Catholic Boy Scouts, Catholic University Students' League, clubs. That eventually they had a major disagreement over this, but they managed to make peace over that. Sure. And apart from that, the Vatican and Italy get on fairly well. But I think what we have to understand in the 1930s is the terror of communism, of anti-clericalism. What happened in Mexico with, is this going to come back to Europe, or is this going to come to Europe? What are we going to do? In the same way as, other political nations like the British or the French were undergoing appeasement with Hitler and other places, the Vatican said, let's make deals with authoritarian regimes so that we are protected from the worst successes or from their arbitrary rule. And concordats work quite well in Italy, Portugal, and Spain. I don't quite remember the Portuguese example, but in Italy, the concordat is still in force. There were minor modifications in the 1980s, but to this day, it's... The German concordat is a bit more of desperation. The Nazis had been condemned. The church is well aware that they are pantheists, and although notionally or nominally Hitler, Himmler, and Goebbels were born Catholics, they never had affection for the Catholic Church. Much closer to pantheism or a worship of nature, and this sense that nature wanted, to use their words, the German race to be the highest in the universe, and that they sort of almost worshipped the folk as almost, I don't know, Druidic religion or something like that. So they had been condemned. But then, of course, Hitler becomes. This presents a conundrum because to clash with Nazism openly will lead to violence and major problems. And Hitler's quite clever. When he becomes chancellor in the garrison church at Potsdam, he praises Christianity and the legacy of Christianity in German culture. He had an idea, which is in the original Nazi manifesto, of positive Christianity. By the way, positive here does not mean good. It means de-Judaized Christianity. Actually, Hitler tries to create something called a de-Judaized Bible. And to remove the Jewish bits from a Bible means it becomes a very short book. Because it's quite difficult. Judaism from Christianity. At the end of the day, Christianity is a Jewish heresy in some ways, if we want to put it like that. So when they're negotiating a Concordat with Hitler, Pacelli, Eugenio Pacelli, who'd been nuncio in Munich and then Berlin, is the chief negotiator. By the end of the Concordat, he says, I'm sure Hitler will break some of the terms of the agreement, but surely he won't break all of them simultaneously. Little did he know what the Nazis would be like, because almost immediately they start infringing on church property, trying to stop Catholic education, cancelling Catholic parties. There is a lot of persecution against Catholics in Germany. So Hitler could not be trusted, and the church is never under any illusions that Hitler is a nasty piece of work.
Well, so obviously we know about the atrocities towards the Jewish people, but also those who are the Catholic nuncios all across Europe to make those concordats in order to avoid the rise of the Nazi Germany parties, Nazi Germany party, to rule Europe. It seems like Pius XI predicted something really evil that would happen over the next years. How adamant was Pius XI towards Hitler, and particularly when Mussolini and Hitler joined forces?
Well, officially, but for instance, I think it's 1938 when Hitler goes on a state visit to Italy. Okay. The Pope makes sure he's in Castel Gandolfo, not to be there to receive him. And he also issues a holiday so that the Vatican museums won't be open and that Hitler can't visit them. Yeah. During Kristallnacht, he issues an encyclical Mit brennender Sorge. Very little German, but it means with burning anxiety, and it's actually written in German, and it condemns the atrocities. It condemns attacks on Jews, but it doesn't condemn Nazism. What is happening at the meantime is that Pius XI has also come a Jesuit called Fage, who'd actually been a major opponent of segregation or Jim Crow laws in the southern United States, to write an encyclical on common humanity against racism. And this is being written when Italy issues its own racial laws in 1938 in a public audience to Belgian school nuns. I think Pius XI says, culturally, we are all Semitic.
Yes.
I mean, this is a brilliant defense of the iniquities of modern racialist theories and anti-Semitism. The encyclical is completed, but it was never published. We could maybe talk later as to why it was never published. As we've recently found the draft, it was discovered in the 1990s, and now we've found further ones in the Vatican archives. It doesn't read very well because it distinguishes between bad pseudoscientific anti-Semitism of the modern world versus the good anti-Judaism that the church has always supported since St. Augustine's time. Yes. And the two are not related, and they get into the encyclical isn't as impressive as people think. But it doesn't make any impact because the Pope dies when it's on his desk and his successor never publishes it. But there is certainly a sense of outward antipathy and really not wanting to collaborate or play Hitler's game.
And so just to keep that in the shelf, and then re-emerging it in the 1990s, and then recently with the new documentation. Is it still an ongoing investigation?
Yes, although with archives it's always unpredictable
Yes.
because we've found it, but we've not really found reports or documents outlining why the Pope. First, don't publish this yet. We'll decide it needs redrafting, but there isn't a clear rationale as to why not. And my own suspicion, and it's only an opinion, I'm not pretending that this is an objective or substantiated or documentary one. I think with the war looming and Vatican neutrality becoming uppermost again, I at this moment. And at the end of the Second World War, with the anti-communist crusade, I think he had other priorities, if I can put it so brutally.
Yeah.
It's a missed opportunity, but I think we may never quite know why, but who knows? Maybe next week somebody will find a wonderful letter in the Vatican archives and will give us the reason. There are manuscript pages in the Pius XII series. That'll take some time to get through.
Yeah, I'm sure it is complicated, and especially when messing up with Catholic Church, with its whole influence, and then discovering something, but then when it goes out to the public, it becomes distorted.
Yeah.
So, and now
I agree.
Yeah. So now we have Pius XII in power, in the doing his papacy run. Then World War II is underway. Holocaust, Nazi Germany conquering Europe, taking over Poland at first, and then expanding his ambition to take over the Soviet Union. Then we have the concentration camps, and all of this whole situation inside of a shrouded with a dark cloud. They've tried to have some diplomacy, but Pius, as you say in the book, lacked that diplomatic strength to seek peace when meeting with the Allies, or maybe Nazi Germany as well. I wondered, how did the papal authority lose its credibility in diplomacy, Christian values, and ethics, which sounded like everything was upside down, and the solution was delayed till the end of the war?
Yeah. Mind you, I think neutrality during the Second World War was a difficult game to play.
Yeah.
The other very famous example, as are the Swedish, I guess. And for instance, one of the things which I always think reflects remarkably poorly on Eamon de Valera, the Taoiseach called Prime Minister of Ireland, is that when Hitler dies, he sends condolences to the German embassy. And you sort of go, no, come on, you don't need to do this at the end of the war. And he said, I did it. So I think that probably didn't particularly endear Ireland to a lot of the Allied countries. But Ireland, of course, sorry.
But these condolences had an intention behind from Ireland?
Yeah, to prove that they were genuinely neutral, that they were not part of the Allied side. You know, Ireland never joined NATO and always wanted to neutrality. My modest argument would be that you could do that without expressing regret for the death of Hitler.
Yeah.
You can still remain neutral without going to that extreme step.
Sure.
But Ireland also is safely protected by having Britain as an island in front of it and being quite far away from Nazi Germany.
Yes.
The papacy basically surrounded by Nazi Germany in 1943. And at the start of the war, the Pope is actually willing to take bigger risks. There's the famous Abwehr plot, which is concocted by German intelligence around Admiral Canaris, German generals, and former Catholic politicians like Josef Müller. But they asked the Vatican, could you talk to the English and the French and say what a peace deal might look like if we assassinate Hitler? Will we be allowed to retain Austria and the Sudetenland? And Neville Chamberlain and the French don't believe they are reliable. They don't believe that this conspiracy against Hitler can succeed. And is bringing a peace deal from potential murderers of Hitler. It also reveals the date of the invasion of Belgium and France. But the Belgian ambassador says, we have no evidence of this, and we're not going to take this into account. So the Vatican does try to play the Allied side initially, but it's ignored. And from that, it learned somewhat the wrong lesson, saying we have to imagine what will happen if Hitler finds out and we are so badly exposed.
Right.
So from then on, the Vatican tries neutrality. But the problem is that the Vatican isn't just a state, it's also a moral religion. You know, everybody's made in the image of God, so it has a problem that it can't just really technically look after its own religionists. Since 1914, it has way more listening posts, and it's getting terrible reports of atrocities and wrongdoing.
Wow. So it is quite difficult. So there's this change of neutrality from what you said, from World War One, and then World War Two. It changes their views of neutrality, and as you said, it was merely difficult to reach out to every Catholic country to find a peace deal, which is quite interesting, because there was this diplomat. I think it was a German diplomat. I don't remember. That I was reading on the book that it generated such a massive, not an outrage, but an kind of an act of desperation to protect, for example, Belgium, through a ear whispering of someone who said something in a metaphoric way. But I think it was the Prime Minister of Belgium that understood that and tried, okay, we have to gather forces ASAP to protect our country from a Nazi invasion.
Yeah, but I think this initial papacy in 1939-40 of warning the Allies of being on their side, it regrets it, and it really avoids it after that. For instance, in Christmas 1942, in the midst of the final solution, we now really know that there are death camps. There are bishops, priests writing in that Christmas message. And this is the most explicit, and I use that in inverted commas, statement by Pius XII, who says that we deplore those who know other fault than their heritage. He uses the Italian word stirpe, which can mean heritage or race, who are left to waste away and die through no fault. Not the clearest condemnation of the Holocaust that you could have. And the Pope barely says a word. He doesn't even officially protest when the Germans invade Rome and capture most of Italy up till Naples, let's say.
Yes.
He doesn't issue any protests on what's going on, even when the Jews of Rome are rounded up, of what Hitler might do. And the German ambassador in Rome, Wiesack, used it up under his very windows. The Pope has been collaborative and has not caused us any embarrassment.
So it was just let it all.
Sorry.
It was just let it all come, and then we find a peaceful solution after the war. So that's what you're trying to say.
Exactly. But at the same time, one has to be very careful, because the papacy does little and says nothing. But on the ground, you have very brave Catholics like Cardinal Saliège, who condemns the roundup of Jews in France. Bishop von Galen of Münster, who condemns the euthanasia program. You have hundreds of Catholics in embassies in Bratislava, Budapest, I should say, and Ankara, creating escape routes for Jews without Vatican coordination. So you're doing things there. And then, unfortunately, you have people like Joseph Tiso or Eustacia priests who are actually collaborating in the final solution, rounding up Jews. So, Catholicism is a bit like yin and yang. There's good and bad,
Yeah.
and it's quite difficult to measure.
So what happened then afterwards when members of the Nazi Germany went to the tribunals of Nuremberg? Were also the clerical staff, some of them clerical staff who were allied to Nazi Germany, went also into the Nuremberg tribunal?
So behind the iron block, a lot of cardinals and archbishops are arrested and put on show trials, but it's not quite clear that they did collaborate with the Nazis as much as Stalin's agents allege.
Mm-hmm.
In the book, I discuss something known as the rat lines, where an Austrian bishop called Alois Huid, several Croatian clergymen in Rome in the Illyrian College, which used to train Croatian priests, or still does, I should say, created fake humanitarian passports to allow a lot of Nazis and fascists to escape to South America on church-stamped passports.
Yeah.
And now the church provides some of the documentation and evidence for Nuremberg. It collaborates with the International War Crimes Tribunal.
Mm-hmm.
But Hans Frank, the military governor of Poland, the butcher of Warsaw as he was known, converts to Catholicism while on trial. And shouldn't we forgive this man because he's shown a change of heart? And a number of German clergymen or whatever say, oh, the Nuremberg trials and all of this has been very punitive. It's very unfair. So there is a lot of voices in the church sort of saying, shouldn't we be clement? I mean, even Pius XII had been agenda of Germany. And this is all starting to reemerge. So it's deeply troubling to think that the church didn't feel that it could condemn these Nazi leaders. Pius XII condemns Nazism, but what is horrific is he never condemns the Holocaust after.
Yeah, which is, as you said, and it was as we were talking about, it is quite a twofold situation. One, condemning the atrocities of Nazi Germany, and two, lacking that diplomatic authority to put Pius XII himself into judging as if he was at the Nuremberg tribunal or any sort or related to it, and not having again the diplomatic strength to take over the situation. So we would say that this period during the Second World War and what happened afterwards with the escape of Nazi officials to South America was quite difficult to grasp, and this pontificate, was probably one of the most worst of this period.
I would agree with you on a number of levels on that one. He's not my favorite pope, I have to be honest, and the fact that there's a process of is I find very troubling. But to be honest with you, at the same time, he is very worried about the growth of communism, and that a lot of countries, Catholic Poland has fallen under that sway, and he's collaborating a lot with the CIA at this time to stop. There is an excommunication of all communists. And in the 1948 first Italian elections, not entirely him, but a number of Catholic intellectuals come up with a rather catchy slogan: remember that in the voting booth, God can see you, but Stalin can't.
As it also happened with, but not with the fear of communism and trying to keep fascism in other countries, where Italy had ended its fascism, but in Spain and Portugal it continued. Salazar and Franco continued to this propaganda view of we have to maintain us in power because God is watching us. I still remember my granddad going to school, having the Christ cross in schools as it was like that during the 50s, the 60s, in a bit of the 70s, and further a bit in the 80s during post-fascism, but that would be another topic to discuss in the future.
But a fascinating one.
It is fascinating. It is fascinating indeed. And it was trying to keep Salazar. I think he was the most powerful man of the whole country in front of Craveiro Lopes, who was the Republican president at the time, made Queen Elizabeth II visit the country. I do remember this story that she kneeled herself and kissed, gave a smooch on Salazar's hand. I'm not sure if that's true, but it was a way of demonstrating that fascism in Portugal was to stay in. I don't remember much about Franco, but could be somewhere along those lines.
Yeah, I think so, but I think also the fear in the Cold War is that if Portugal falls, what about its African colonies? Will they end up in Soviet? And also, I mean, there's, I think, a fascinating book and the Madonna of Fatima, because Salazar becomes very, very pro pilgrimage and valorizing the Madonna of Fatima from a political point of view.
Yes.
With Franco's Spain, it has to be said that the Republicans make major mistakes in the Civil War because they execute the clergy on the Republican side, and that creates martyrs. And that was so unnecessary. So in some ways, Franco has an easy propaganda win. He says, look at what happens when you have godless Republicans. They kill priests and nuns.
Yes.
Forgetting that Franco killed priests and nuns in the Basque country because they were left-wing.
They were left-wing. And again, it's this period of time when the World War II ends and fascism in Spain and Portugal continues, as you said, but at the same time, this fear-mongering of communism approaching, where 50s, 60s, 70s, global economy a bit more leveraged, and then anti-communist wars happening in the Vietnam, the decolonization movement, which it wildly spread across Africa and Asia, albeit it was at the beginning of around the early 20th century that was going on. Then the Cold War, of course, the Israeli-Palestine conflict, the Korean conflict that led to both Korean wars, the student rebellions, sexual revolution that featured in media, and then the early 70s of the fall of fascism in Portugal and Spain, across other religious conflicts. Obviously, the papal regency needed to flirt with this and trying to go around, because he wouldn't grasp everything, as we were saying. And two major popes, John Paul XXIII and Paul VI. What sort of reactions did they take to tackle all these situations, and which one had more impact?
So I have to say, these are a bit the heroes of my book.
Okay.
Because I think they get things right. Now, one of the things I have to say in this period that the church starts changing its mind from the early 20th century is they realize they made a major mistake there. So they start saying that missionary work should be for the benefit of the local communities, and they should privilege local cultures rather than being conduits of imperialism. That's the aspiration. And that when it comes to decolonization, they are really in favor of new national regimes. And because in the French Empire, you have people like Marcel Lefebvre, who is very much in favor of the French staying, and he thinks Africans are not ready for anything really in Lefebvre's deeply warped and racist mindset. Lefebvre is important because recently bishops inspired by him have broken to go with the church. So it's an ongoing story, the horrible one of Marcel Lefebvre. But I think decolonization is a bit of a happy story with the Catholic Church because it generally favors it, and it has good relations in terms of missionary activity and investment with post-colonial societies and nations.
Yes.
The really good thing as well, who'd actually been identified by Pius X's spy network as suspect, potentially having modernist tendencies, actually calls for the biggest meeting of church bishops since 1870, the Second Vatican Council,
Yeah.
in which he advocates seeing modernity not as opportunity, that the church should be optimistic, that the church should update itself, that it should go back to basics, that it should not fear the world, but engage in the world, not be fearful about criticizing it, but be open-minded to change its language, to which it's ministering, the vernacular rather than Latin, simplify ritual. The Pope should collaborate with bishops more in the governance of the church. The Jews did not murder Christ. They should be tolerated, and we should have better relations with other religions. Religious freedom within states should be accepted. In the Catholic Church. Immense intellectual progress, all coming from this council. Now, John the 23rd, when the council opens, within a week of the council opening, you have the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yes.
So a major crisis, and nobody knows this, but John the 23rd has stomach cancer so there's an immediate conclave. Paul VI arrives, who is a great intellectual, had been a great enemy of Mussolini, friends with Jacques Maritain, one of the more liberal and open-minded Catholic theologians of the time. He tries to keep the council going without schisms in the church. So he makes the agenda of the council more conservative, and he intervenes at times to stop too many radical decisions. He tries compromise to the best of his ability. But during the council, he visits Jerusalem. He meets with the Patriarch of Constantinople. He goes to the UN, demanding that war never again happen in the world. And he lays down the papal tiara. He gets rid of ceremonies. He's very, very good. One thing, though, that's happening behind the scenes, because I'm to your listeners, I'm going to simplify this a lot, but I think what's really at the heart of the sexual revolution is not just changes in culture and what's right and wrong, but progesterone, the contraceptive pill, brings the possibility of guilt-free and non-procreative sex to masses. And I think that ultimately sexual intercourse does not merely have a procreative function. That this should come to a surprise for human beings tells you how backward the Catholic Church was in that. Although, having said that, there was an encyclical about marriage in the 1930s, Casti Connubii, that just accepted the possibility that a husband and wife's love might have something to do with sex or sexual intercourse. But we are really looking at a conservative mindset. So there's a special commission. It's decided that the council will not look at this, that's working on progesterone and the contraceptive tablet. The majority, 70% of this commission, writes a report saying that they think that the taking of the contraceptive pill is in keeping with Catholic teaching. The 30% write a minority report, and according to indiscretions, because Cardinal Ottaviani, who is the head theologian of the Vatican, the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, puts the minority report on top of the majority report. And the Pope has a very difficult time deciding between the two reports. But in 1968, the year of the student rebellions, when the world seems on fire, stability, the Pope issues Humanae Vitae, which is the biggest papal encyclical still in force on human reproduction. Now, it's against the contraceptive pill, but it's a very difficult document insofar as it states any artificial impediment to contraception is wrong. Any natural impediment to contraception might be part of family planning and a loving marriage. But why natural and artificial are not morally the same is ambiguous, and it remains
Mm.
contested.
Did they also
Mm.
held their ambiguity, or maybe having a different opinion towards abortion?
Abortion has always been a dogma in the Catholic Church. There have been theological debates, and we have to go back to the Middle Ages, and I'm not an expert on this, about fetus.
Mm.
I mean, that is a theological debate and a half.
Mm.
But by now, abortion, and still in the Catholic Church, is not a subject for discussion.
Mm.
In canon law, abortion is an absolute evil, and no good can come from abortion.
Mm.
I don't think in this particular area my view on abortion is that relevant, but because I'm trying to assess what the
Sure.
church has said. But there was never going to be movement, at least at this stage, on abortion.
Mm.
I'll tell you one of my opinions. Hans Frank can be forgiven for killing millions of Jews and other groups in Nazi-occupied Poland.
Yeah.
I would suggest that a girl who terminates her pregnancy early might also be susceptible of that same forgiveness.
Okay.
In my own view,
Yeah.
you know, if we're going to be willing to forgive more than that, it seems to me that we might want to think about God's mercy and that sort of thing. But in the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s and 70s, abortion's not open for discussion. And in some ways, the church is utterly flawed by a lot of things that were happening: gay liberation,
Mm.
transsexualism. So
Yes.
it hadn't even contemplated. So in some ways, the world is creating new phenomena that the church takes a long time or isn't really sure about what to do with, because it's spiraling out of control.
Mm.
This 1970s are violent years of terrorism. The Italian Red
Yes.
Brigades, one of the Pope's best friends, Aldo Moro, is kidnapped by the Red Brigades and executed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in some ways, Paul VI, who'd been a great reforming Pope and a liberal, dies wondering, had things gone too far? And a lot of liberal theologians, Joseph Ratzinger, who Tübingen, and his classroom is invaded and he's contested, goes from being liberal to being quite conservative. The 1970s in particular opens the question, does reform actually improve the church? Or do things just go too far, and do people want more and more and more, and does it lead to disorder? I think this great reforming and hopeful moment, and I think it's a sad one.
Mm. So yeah, and from what you're saying, that 50s, 60s were more sort of like a boom against conservatism, and there was some sort of support from the papacy. And then the 70s, it came all down from scratch, trying to questioning whether these reforms would go favor the church, would give any benefits to what was happening outside of the church, and whether they needed to be more modernized. But that goes back to how they would view modernity.
And also, I think the church despaired a little, because the vision of modernity that came out of Vatican II was not the vision of modernity
Yeah.
in which the world was heading towards the
Yes.
end of the Cold War.
Yeah.
And that is what terrified them, that they were following the world rather than leading it.
Yeah, and I think that in itself is a crisis within Catholicism, in losing its power and then trying to flirt, so to speak, with what was happening, by making having talks with different politicians in power
Yeah.
that were losing its influence, not just in the country itself, but during the period of decolonization and other sorts of liberal movements that were happening across the world.
Again, I would definitely agree with you. And sometimes when you have a nice reforming impulse and progress is made,
Yes.
what follows is often a cold shower in which people say, "Oh, we've gone too far.
Mm.
Let's not go in."
Yeah.
What happened at that stage in as you come into the 1980s?
Yeah. And and that's exactly what I would like to talk about, because the 80s and 90s were by far the last greatest 2 decades, so to speak. But at the same time, whether there's a light, there's also a darkness. I was born in 94, and my parents were really concerned during the 90s, where the pedophilia in church and outside of church was on the rise. There were huge cases of child abduction and sexual abuse. But at the same time, the shortest papacy of John Paul I that gave rise to John Paul II, which for many Catholics devotees, he was by far the greatest pope, that he was nicknamed as John Paul the Great, up to the point of being I don't remember how to say it in English, but he had that sanctification period.
Yeah,
When
he was canonized.
Canonized, yes. I say beatificação. That's
Yes.
what I was saying.
Yeah.
So that's what I wanted to say. And of course, his visit to Portugal was also amazing. And I was still a child when that happened. And so back to it. There was the pedophilia case, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the historical treatment of the dismantle of the USSR in 1991, more visits to the South America under the still dictatorships of in Chile with Pinochet and Videla in Argentina, that in the 80s, of course, and the Rwanda genocide in 94, which curiously gave birth to a film, just curiously. But despite these events, how John Paul II managed to turn around this in order to maintain the Vatican being powerful and face the challenges and the consequences of this whole worldwide ordeal in Catholicism, of course.
Indeed. I mean, you've really done a major summary of the politics of the 1980s and 1990s, much better than I could have done in some ways. And you were born in 94. I was born in 1982.
Yeah.
So he'd been Pope 4 years when I was born. And in some ways, I felt he was, because of I think the second or third longest pontificate, if you count St. Peter's. St. Peter still technically had the longest pontificate, but you're an ancient historian. Nobody really knows how long St. Peter reigned for.
Yes, that's true. Even when the writings I say this was this, but we don't actually know.
Yeah. So we know that he was the second. So an immensely charismatic figure, a great philosophical intellectual, and a good sense of humor. Also good looking. I have to be careful because I don't want to offend the current Pope, but popes are not usually known for their looks.
Yes.
So John Paul II looked full Italian with a very slight accent, but again, it endeared him. And he played such a pivotal role in bringing down communism in Poland by visiting them 3 times and causing major embarrassment for General Jaruzelski's regime. Also, I'm going to talk about the positives of John Paul II. Recognize Israel after a very bad relationship since the reign of Pius XII with the Jewish state. Ecumenical, he had World Religion Days at Assisi. So on the face of it, a good public relations man.
And he knew his audience. He knew how to handle the media too. And I also would like to add, before you can continue, when you finish, and then just furthering the question of his attempted murder by an Islamist, and then how did he manage to forgive the gentleman and making reconciliations with Islam, with Judaism as well, and other related religions within all three.
Ali Asher shot John Paul II
Yeah.
is not helped by the fact that Asher has been alive and has written multiple books denying what he said in the previous books.
Mm-hmm.
He realizes that they always will sell, and he's never told us the truth.
Yes.
So, on the part of it, Turkish movement called the Grey Wolves. He now claims it was the Ayatollah Khomeini, not Khamenei, who recently passed away, who wanted him to kill the Pope.
Yes.
But most historians believe that it was the he decided to hire the Bulgarian Secret Service to get this Pope murdered because he was such an influential figure against the Iron Curtain. Now, what's the evidence of the Bulgarian connection? Well, we know from phone records that Asher called the Bulgarian embassy in Rome and that he had a Bulgarian. For somebody whose Turkish is not necessarily, although there are close connections and there is a Turkish minority in Bulgaria, I wouldn't argue that this is the best evidence we have. The Iranian connection has been much harder to ascertain. So, also Asher, it's not clear he was an Islamist or become rather more so. So I would think that he was more a communist sort of hired assassin who also had severe mental health challenges as well, because he's not a very lucid interlocutor. And John Paul II used his assassination. You look at the medical reports of severed intestines, of his shoulder blade, and we're getting quite close to arteries. The real miracle was that in rush hour traffic, he got from St. Peter's Square to the Gemelli Hospital in less than 20 minutes. In Rome, that is very difficult to achieve. So that's a real miracle. And this is a Portuguese connection, that in the 1990s, he spoke to the last surviving Fatima visionary. I can't remember the name, Sister something or other. And she said, that was my third mystery. I saw you being shot and I predicted this years before. But surely isn't it better to predict things before they happen than after? So it's hardly a prediction. So I've always been very unimpressed with the mysteries of Fatima, which arrive after the event. But that's a different story. So he is one of the more controversial popes because he's one of the few popes who actually was assassinated, or there was an assassination attempt in the modern era. Now, for somebody who created World Youth Days and various other things, his theology is incredibly conservative. No women priests, no married clergy, condemnation of any investigation that goes outside of the strictures of canon law, the church's own internal law. So you're playing for the team. You have to obey orders and rules. If you're outside of the church, or if you don't obey orders, you're out, you're excommunicated. And a lot of theologians get excommunicated in this period or have their license to teach Catholic theology revoked. Cardinal Ratzinger, as he became, was of the faith, and a lot of people end up in the bad books of the Vatican. In some cases, it's not all bad. The followers of Marcel Lefebvre, who are anti-Semitic, and they say that all other religions in the world are a manifestation of the devil's work. I mean, this is a literal quotation, that the reason there are other religions in the world is because that is Satan's plan, to confuse and divide humanity, which is not something the Catholic Church believed then, nor does it now. So we're really pleased, in some ways, I think, at least, that we don't have people like that within the fold. Now, the paedophilia crisis is incredibly complicated. Because to realize there's a problem is in the 1980s in the southern United States. There are a few high-profile cases, and officials in the Washington nunciature start saying, we need to be careful not just to protect these guys, these pedophiles, moving them from parish to parish. We need to denounce them to the police and to be much more public. Father Doyle who is still a major investigator against paedophilia in the church, actually wrote advice to the nunciature and a protocol on what to do. And he said, if we don't do this, we will face class actions and dollars from people suing the church for the damage done by paedophile priests. Initially, John Paul II dismisses this as an Irish and an American problem. He says, well, nowhere else in the church is there this problem, therefore it's a particular situation. But at the height of it, we have to protect the clergy. Additional sacrament, they are higher beings. And not only that, but clergy must not go to the police and inform another clergy. Cardinal Hoyos, as he was at the time, the head of the dicastery for clergy, actually sends a letter praising as heroic a Norman bishop in France who refused to collaborate. So this is a major, major scandal. Marcial Maciel, who is the founder of the Legionaries of Christ in Mexico, one of the great success stories economically and in terms of priestly vocations, is a serial abuser. Seminarians, he abuses children, but also he has 2 secret families. And he claims to these families that he's a CIA agent. That's why they never see him. And he abuses his own children in that family. We have countless pictures of John Paul II with Maciel praising him as a beacon of light in the church.
Yeah, I do.
Stopping investigations.
Because when I was reading it and I saw that famous picture of him, and John Paul II was quite dismissive towards him. I think he didn't even look at Maciel's face for...
Oh.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think that there was that dismissive and saying to him, I know what you did, and I'm not looking at you because you are shrouded with evil. And maybe someone who took a photograph of it and the media seeing that probably understood what was happening there.
Maybe. But unfortunately, with this picture, the problem is in public.
Yes.
Catholicism had to offer.
Yeah.
On so many occasions. He also threw a special birthday party for Maciel in the Vatican. Whereas Cardinal Ratzinger, you could tell, was getting very, very worried about this. During Lent, before John Paul II died, in the Stations of the Cross, he said, there is so much filth in the church. Church must do something about this. Part of the problem as well is that John Paul II increasingly becomes an ill man in the 1990s. He's got Parkinson's, he's got other health problems associated with his assassination attempt. So how far he's really in charge of the church during the paedophilia is anyone's guess, to my mind. And so there may also be a sense that in the declining years of his pontificate, he might not be entirely in charge, and the problem is that there isn't strong leadership. That's why the paedophilia crisis is not being dealt with. But it's not just an Anglo-Saxon phenomenon. If you look at the world, you now have them in Chile, in Germany, in France, and I suspect there are more countries further afield coming, and all of these reports reveal that anywhere between 4 and 8% of clergy were paedophiles.
Yeah. And I think it's also that issue during the 90s also extended to the 2000s when Ratzinger became Pope, known as the Benedict XVI, but couldn't handle the pressure over his 8 years of papacy regime over there. I think I have some an idea of that happened. I think that, and the media just also told us that he couldn't handle the pressure. And then he needed to resign, becoming the Pope Emeritus.
Yeah.
So
Ernestine III of a papal resignation.
Yeah. And now that we enter into that, then Pope Francis comes in, makes a revolutionary move, the first Jesuit to ruin the papacy. He's another brilliant Pope, spoken by the people, declared by the media, that he made of lot of excommunications towards many people who were involved in pedophilia and also in corruption. Funding, the church funding was being filled into their own pockets. Loads of stuff happened. And then we have Pope Leo XIV, curiously known for his incredible workout routines. And
Oh, really?
yes, I do remember that seeing Men's Health website. They made a report, not so like an interview, indirectly or directly to Pope Leo, showing his workout routine. It was interesting, and I wanted to bring this over to the conversation, but I mean it's a slightly different topic.
Yeah.
It was a curious thing. And Pope Francis, going back to Pope Francis, that he had this progressist movement towards these issues, including when Trump became President of the United States in his first mandate, and his, they call it these far-right movements of reinforcing the wall, as they did in Israel, his acknowledgement of in Jerusalem, of being not belong to the Palestinians, but mostly for the Israelis, and all these convoluted times that they still perdure. And the Pope Leo, now is in charge by election of Pope Francis, seems to ignore, but seems to have another wave of schism in dealing issues with immigration, I'd say racism as well, cultural identity, nationalism, which are very old topics that has been discussing wildly, not just now, but decades ago. And you say in your last chapter of the book, as you say, who am I to judge? And that's the question I want to put to you. Not saying who are you, but say, who are we to judge the Vatican? And will this schism long last?
So, to be honest with you, it's not me personally asking the question. The first person who asked that question was Jesus, and then Pope Francis on the plane. And I think it's a brilliant question insofar as it's taking the church back to its communitarian ideal.
Yes.
Where social, familial, economic problems are dealt with, rather than being where the church is at its worst as an economic and political powerhouse. And I think the attempt by Francis to return to basics is to move away from judgment, but to community, is a wonderful. I have become, in the past 2 years, a great fan of Pope Leo, in the sense also that I think he's a really interesting, he's a much, although he's a Peruvian citizen, he doesn't have the Latin American fire that Francis had in some ways. He's a much more peaceable Chicagoan person, but he's the first than the eighth to have scientific training. He's got a mathematics degree as his first degree. And his encyclical on AI is a masterpiece because it takes us to church social teaching, and it doesn't condemn AI. It says that it's both an opportunity, but that there are obvious challenges about human exploitation. Very healthy.
Yes.
He's also had little time for the SSPX, the Marcel Lefebvre faction, and I think that's been good that they, although they're appealing against their excommunication at the moment, I think it would be a good thing if they were excommunicated, because I think we don't need that. And also, I think on nationalism and cultural identity, he's going back to one of the key things. The Pope is Pontifex Maximus, which means bridge builder.
Yeah.
Not a builder of walls, but ultimately somebody who connects our common humanity. And I think that's a very important aspect of the church's mission, and I'm glad that both he and Francis assumed that.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong, nobody's perfect. I also am worried about his agreement with China and what the secret clauses there are. I have my suspicions that nothing good comes out of the Chinese Communist Party, but
Mm.
maybe I'm being unfair, but I'm really suspicious of that. So I'm hopeful, and I think that keeps heading in communitarian directions and protecting the weak against the strong. It will do better than it has in the 20th century.
And I think that there's a lot of noise as well, and not many people know who actually Pope Leo is.
Mm.
I'm myself, I don't know much about him because the noise is out there, but there's a lot of storytelling as well, and many people through YouTube Shorts, through I want to say nonsensical podcasts that they talk about Pope Leo's actions without actually knowing deep down what the actual source it is, and this is trying to find a gap in order to amplify. So I'd say most of those nonsensical podcasts are mostly people who are Catholics but disagree of what Pope Leo is doing. I mean, he's been over a year, so it takes time for him to dismantle this schism, which hopefully won't last long. And the mission of Catholic Church, including Islam or maybe Judaism, is to unite the people. And I do believe that he's attempting to do it, but it will take a long time to do, because Trump is still on charge. The far right are also increasing in Europe. Many youngsters are following conservative policies without even realizing what it actually means. It's just taking from granted, and that seems to take a very dangerous path towards what's happening. So I would say it's a mostly cultural issue, but it's also religious, with the loads and loads of immigration from the Middle East, from Southeast Asia, to mostly Islamic people coming to Europe, coming to the United States, coming to the Far East as well, and having their own civic values or religious values, and trying to, what they say, impose something, which is far more complex than what we actually consume. And I think Pope Leo XIV, for a long time, will try to unite Islam and Judaism by simply talking, as like John Paul II tried to do.
I agree with you, and I think he is going to be certainly somebody from a peaceable tradition. You know, he's an Augustinian,
Yes.
and they are the key experts on just war theory, and he's already rejected most Trumpian and J.D. Vance arguments there.
Yes.
Augustinians are interesting because they are deeply intellectual and they deeply understand the world. But ironically, Martin Luther. But I suspect that this Pope will not be Martin Luther in any shape or form. I think he's a moderate, he's a middle of the road person, and I think he will be good for the church. He understands technology, and we are in a very interesting world. The thing you were social media and divisions. What's really interesting at the moment, and it's minor, but there is an increase. It's been called the Christianity surge, that more people are returning to churches. There are more conversions to Christianity and Catholicism. And I think we really need to study and understand this phenomenon, because at the moment, and I suspect as a scientist and a man of media, he will try to harness and understand this better, and that's a major opportunity for the church.
I do wonder, just very briefly, what's his views on techno-feudalism.
Oh, very much against. I mean, the encyclical Magnificat, which the reason he chose the name Leo XIV is he's inspired by Leo XIII and Rerum Novarum, the first great encyclical against the exploitation of people under capitalism, which the church, I think, issued in 1891. And he reprises that in Magnifico Humanitas, saying that ultimately, though, jobs and destroys their livelihood for the benefit of a few tyrants and a few tech overlords. He doesn't use
Yeah.
uh, technological feudalism as a term, but it's clear he's getting there. And he talks about the exploiters of humanity, whether what is it, anthropogenic or whatever these AI companies. He sees a danger in people losing their jobs and their livelihood.
Yeah.
That he also attacks. He does this actually clearly post-humanism and transhumanism. Anything that removes the intrinsic value of a human being through technology is dangerous. So I think in that he's clearly, I think, ahead of the game. It's nice to see the church ahead of the game rather than behind.
Yeah. And I think it's that progressive movement that tries to grasp from the decades that we were talking about. I'm not saying in the early 20th and almost to the mid 20th century, turn from the 60s onwards, and again inspiration from Pope Leo XIII. And I do believe something will come up. Obviously, this schism will continue, but he's doing his best to promote unity rather than schism, as the external noise ferociously tries to promote.
Yeah, I agree with you. And unfortunately, social media negativity and violent debate rather than sane discussion. So we're stuck with that, unfortunately, I fear, for some time.
Yeah. Well, Ambrogio, I'd love to continue a bit more about this, but it's great. I've managed to read the book in a day and a half, which was great. I really enjoyed it. And
Thank you.
If you're up to, we can have another talk in the future.
Please, I would really enjoy that.
I would love to. It's another scholar I meet, and I mean, eventually, who knows? We'd love to meet in person. I'm going down to London next week, but obviously I will stay there for some time, for a few days. Sorry, and maybe who knows? As you said, I saw you are lecturing in Kent. Are there any conferences, maybe opportunities you might know?
Well, but I live in London, so if you fancy a drink, absolutely.
Oh, great!
I mean, I had a lot of. So we should definitely have a drink.
Yes. No, that would be great. So let's wrap it up.
Sure.
Where they can buy your book, where the listeners can buy your book.
So in good bookshops, on Amazon, on my publisher, Head of Zeus Bloomsbury's website. And if you prefer Kindle or online, it's also an audio book if you prefer that. So,
and then where they can contact you and any other projects you have.
I have a website, Ambrogio A Caiani, all one word.com, and you have a contact button there. Just drop me an email there, and I'll always be very, very happy to respond. I also have an account. So again, if you drop me a message there, very, very happy to ping one back.
And I think, this is a great talk, Ambrogio. And yes, let's schedule another one in the future, and we can maintain the contact. And I'd like to thank you for having the time. And I thank the PR, I think it was Helen, her name, and Fran, her assistant. I thank them. I can't thank them enough for meet another scholar, meet someone who's sharing his book, his latest project. And so, thank you, Ambrogio.
Thank you, Luis. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. And for the listeners tuning into this session, thank you all for tuning in. Share it with a friend, and it's been a pleasure.